So if you're going to incorporate a business, how many share classes should you have? Well, in this video, I'm going to talk about a suitable amount of shares for your corporation, depending on your situation. And now I'm based in Saskatchewan and I help people incorporate here regularly. Some of what I talk about is going to be more specific to Saskatchewan, but a lot of it is pretty general and will be relevant to other jurisdictions as well. So first off, what are shares? Why do you need them? Well, because a corporation is a separate legal entity from the human entity that creates it and owns it, we have shares for these corporations. And these shares are basically just a formal representation of ownership. So if you own a share in a corporation, you're a part owner. So there can be private corporations and there can be publicly traded corporations. So you might own shares in, a bigger company that's traded on a stock exchange, a stock market, but most corporations are just private corporations where they're just owned by one person or two people or a few people, and they're not publicly traded shares. So in this case, if you're starting a corporation and just, it's going to be you owning it, you and your spouse, you and a friend, you and a past coworker, you and a business partner, then you're not going to be setting it up as a publicly traded company where the public can buy the shares. It's just going to be you and, your business partners, the part owners that are owning shares in the corporation. So when you go through the formal incorporation process, you create the shares, and that is the authorization of the shares. So they exist, but that's not enough, because just having them in existence doesn't mean anyone actually owns them. You actually have to assign them or grant them to the rightful owners, which is called the issuance of shares. So some people will create a corporation and authorize shares, but they forget to issue them to the actual owners. So it's important to do both steps. So again, these shares represent some type of stake or ownership in the company. And you can have various different classes of shares. You can have your voting shares, where anyone who owns voting shares gets to vote on the decisions, the activity of the corporation. And then you can have non-voting shares, where it's more so just like an investor, where they don't really have any say or control over the actions of the corporation. So you can have multiple different share classes. You could have one set of share classes, you could have 50 different share classes, and you can assign, different rights and privileges and things like that to each share class. So with the clients that I work with, it's usually just one person, two people, maybe three people that are setting up a corporation. And so they don't need a huge, range or variety of share classes. And here in Saskatchewan, when you do incorporate with the corporate registry, the ISC in Saskatchewan, they have three different options. One is to have one share class. The second option is to have two share classes. And then the third option is custom. And so whenever I help people incorporate, I always go for custom. I never choose just the defaults of one share class or two share classes. Because in my opinion, it's better to have extra share classes and never use them than to have an insufficient amount of share classes and then have to file an amendment to get more, because there is a fee, there is some administrative work to file that amendment to get more share classes. So I would rather see, someone set up a corporation with 5 share classes and only ever use 3, rather than set up a corporation with 2 share classes and then later need 3. And it is important to have multiple share classes, because sometimes you might want the owners who are actually going to have some, decision-making power and voting rights. And then other times you might just have some investors that just want to be able to collect dividends. And then sometimes you're going to have multiple owners who do have voting rights, but also want to be able to take out dividends from the corporation. And they want to take out those dividends at different times in different amounts compared to the other owners, that is, more suitable for their personal financial situation or their contributions to the corporation. So when you're paying out dividends in a corporation, typically the way it works is that if you pay a dividend to someone who owns one share class, you have to pay an equal amount per share to everyone who owns shares in that class. So if you have 2 owners in a business, maybe they're 50-50 like controlling owners and therefore both own 50 shares in Class A, but you might want to make it so that one owner owns Class B and the other owns Class C. And that way, if you want to pay a dividend to just one of the owners, you pay out a dividend to Class B and not Class C, or vice versa. Because if you have 2 owners and they both own Class A, and Class A are set up so that you can pay dividends, then if you pay dividends to one Class A owner, you're supposed to pay it to both. And maybe both don't want it at that time, or in that amount. So having more share classes can give you more flexibility like that. And then you can even have like a second class of voting shares. You could have class B and make them voting, but you could make, the voting less powerful, like, one vote per 2 shares rather than 1 vote per 1 share type thing. So you can structure these in a lot of different ways. So for a smaller corporation, again, where there's just maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 owners, still good to have that flexibility, but maybe 5 share classes or 6 is enough. Whereas if you're having a more complicated share structure, you'll probably want to meet with a lawyer, a corporate lawyer that can help you navigate this appropriately. Because again, it's better to have more than you need and not use them than run into a situation where you're having to go back and file an amendment and create a bunch of different share classes or rearrange the share classes, changing the rights and the privileges of those share classes. So hopefully this video was useful. If so, please click like and feel free to check out and subscribe to my YouTube channel, where I currently have over 290 videos that cover business management and business startup topics.